And then, okay, civil liberties. So you talked about it Friday in your labs. Talked about civil rights a little bit, but we'll talk much more about civil rights next week. There's a difference between civil liberties and civil rights. Civil liberties, obviously, are something that is inalienable from being human, right? So this is what Jefferson's talking about in the Declaration of Independence. When he's talking about the Declaration of Independence, he's specifically talking about the fact that there are certain things that make us human. And that these rights cannot be taken away from us. But when we think about it in terms of government, constitution, the way that we have written those out, right? We have said that they are the personal rights of freedom that federal government, not only federal, but state, local, school boards, counties, right, government generally, because of the 14th Amendment, cannot abridge, either by law, constitution, or judicial interpretation. These are limits on the power of government. So that very first question, your question today, who do civil liberties limit? They limit government. Hey guys, you have to wear a mask if you're sitting in this section. Do you have one? Do we have any spare masks up there? I think Dennis might. The Bill of Rights is something we talked about when we talked about Federalists and Anti-Federalists. If you recall, the framers of the Constitution said, hey, we don't need a Bill of Rights. We're going to protect certain liberties, right? We're going to protect certain liberties in the Constitution itself, and then states are going to be responsible for doing that. They have their own Bill of Rights. It'll be fine. Because the conflict between states and the federal government, states can handle it. But how many of you guys read those Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers that I put up? All of you, right? Woo! Good job. Way to go. All right. So those were written for people with a 5th grade education. That seemed right to you when you read it, right? You're like, yes, this is easy. So that particular conflict was going on in newspapers. These papers were written in newspapers to do certain things. And the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalists, essentially, they came to the point where they were able to come to an agreement. Hey, in New York, we will sign on, we will ratify this Constitution, we will be number 9 if, right? If you include a Bill of Rights. If you include a Bill of Rights. So the first 8 amendments are specific guarantees, right? The 4th Amendment, my favorite, right, says specifically this. It says, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, papers, and or houses, persons, houses, papers, and effects, shall not be abridged. It's specific, unless there's a warrant descriptive, specifically describing the place and person to be searched. It's specific. These are specific limitations on government. First through 8. Okay? The 9th Amendment says, hey, there are some other rights that exist that we forgot about. That we didn't include here. Because they were so obvious to us, we didn't think we had to. Those rights include things like, what? Can anybody think of anything that isn't there? That we now say, hey, look, this is a right that we have? Any ideas? Yeah.
Like stealing personal information?
Okay, well, that's still stealing, right? But that is exactly somewhere in the area of what we're prohibiting from government doing, called privacy, right?
Yes.
Do we see privacy anywhere in the Constitution? No, it's not there. Other things, and we saw this a lot, that's kind of also in that realm of privacy, is the fact that there's no protection for procreation or marriage. There's no protection for family rights to raise their children. Those don't exist in the Constitution. But beginning in the 1800s, the Supreme Court started having cases where they said, hey, look, it is a right of the people to be able to marry, to be able to have children. And we see cases throughout the 20th century in which courts, for example, sentenced someone to sterilization because, why? What are the reasons? Why would somebody be sterilized in the courts?
So they can't have babies.
Yes, sterilization means they can't have babies, but why would a court sentence someone to that? Yeah. Rape? Okay. Maybe they're a rapist. Maybe they're a rapist. And so the court's going to punish them in that way. Or maybe they neglected their children. Right? Or maybe they didn't meet certain IQ tests. Or maybe legislation said, you know, if you're mentally unstable, or if you're black. We see laws passed in the legislature in which people who committed 3 felonies were sterilized to keep them from being further criminal activity. And the Supreme Court at every single turn said, no, you can't do that. That's a fundamental civil liberty. It's not in the Constitution, but it's a fundamental human right. The right to procreate, the right to marry, the right to raise your children. And we see some cases that are older. Loving versus Virginia, we'll talk about next week. Obergefell v. Hodges, which is much more recent, where we talk about that right to marry. The 10th Amendment, as we talked about, says that states and people have other powers. Now, the First Amendment is all we'll have time to talk about today. It's Eric's favorite, while the Fourth is mine, right? The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. It gets complicated right away. The very first phrase says, what? Congress shall not. And so the 14th Amendment, we talked about with incorporation, does what? Makes it to where the states, and so it makes it all law, right? So that means municipal law, state law, city law, or county law, school boards, etc. Can make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Now, what does that mean, an establishment of religion? And then prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That gets a little tough, right? That gets a little tough. Jefferson, when drafting the First Amendment, wrote to the Danbury Baptist Convention that there should be a wall of separation between church and state. The Baptists were all for it. Why were the Baptists for it? They're not anymore.
Yeah.
But why were the Baptists for it when Jefferson's writing this? A wall of separation between church and state. Hold on one second, yeah?
Let's do it in English.
So other Christian denominations that were bigger couldn't crush them?
Well, they were Protestants originally, but
Okay, so it's still in the zeitgeist, you know, that religious persecution is the reason we have left this place, left where we came from. Where did it, right here, yeah.
The English were Catholics.
What?
The English were Catholics.
Not exactly. Church of England, though. Yeah, I mean, Anglican, right, rather than, but there is that fear, right, of a state church, okay? And Jefferson is particularly, yeah.
at the time, majority of Baptists were in southern states, right?
Yes and no, they're spread out, but there were quite a few in the southern states.
In Rhode Island. They were in Rhode Island.
Okay.
But this was in Rhode Island, which is not even the state. Well, I mean, the problem, of course, with religion is you can find justification for almost anything, right? I mean, and that's exactly what we talked about last week, right? You can still find justification for it. It was more kind of this idea that they did not want to be part of a state church. They wanted to be able to decide for themselves how to worship. And Jefferson in particular was concerned about this because he looked at things like the Crusades. And remember the Spanish Inquisition that we talked about last Wednesday? Right? He said, look, anytime church and state is entwined, the church uses the sword of the state to persecute people. Okay? Now, Jefferson was a deist. He certainly was not of any of the large faiths of the time. Unlike James Madison, who was, right? James Madison, who is part of the most popular church, the most populous church at that time, he argued the same thing, but for different reasons. Madison says there ought to be a wall of separation between church and state because power corrupts religion. It makes it less pure. Keeping politics out of religion keeps religion focused where it ought to be. Two very different perspectives, but both agree there ought to be separation between church and state. However, the First Amendment is complicated. And so, for the most part, the Supreme Court decisions involving the establishment of religion have fallen down on the side of accommodation. And there's a reason for that. I am a professor at the University of Oklahoma. So who do I work for? The school, but the state. I work for the state, right? So if I talk about my religion in this classroom, am I doing something as an agent of the state? What do you guys think?
Yep.
What? It could be seen that way, right? Now you guys are adults, right? And so in my role here with you, I get a little bit more leeway. High school teachers, elementary, secondary school teachers, there's less room for a number of reasons. Let me give you an example from my life. When I was in the 5th grade, I came home one day and I'm walking around with my daddy, and I'm like, Daddy, did you know that God is all around us? God is in the trees, and the rocks, and the air, and inside of me, and God's everywhere. And Daddy said, that's very interesting, Melody. You're a smart little girl. Where'd you get that from? And I said, Mrs. Gates. And he was suddenly livid. He was furious. Right? Why? Why was he furious? Was it because of my religious ideas? No. He was okay with that if they were mine. His problem was what? That an elementary school teacher in a position of authority as a public school teacher was shaping my religious views. And it's been very clear from the Supreme Court that, hey, you can't do that. Children are impressionable. You have to be careful about minors, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. At the same time, if I tell you guys that I'm a member of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monsters, or monsters, depending on your, sect, and I worship online every Thursday at 7 p.m., is that a problem? Can I tell you guys that? Why? Why can I tell you?
Giving us information about
I'm a Pastafarian.
P word.
Recommend that we become a Pastafarian.
I didn't, right? But if I said 4 extra credit, if you log on this Thursday, have I gone too far? Yeah, right? That's a step that's too far. I cannot link your benefits from the state, right? Your grade in this class, to my religion. Okay? Does that make sense? So the limit test has talked about accommodation in this way because we are people who have religious views. And because we have religious views and we make up government, then it's difficult. There's a line. And in 71, first of all, in the 1960s, there were any number of laws that were passed giving money to private schools for people from the state, for children from the state, buying textbooks, paying teachers. This is one of those cases. And the reason it was white flight, because of integration, white parents put their children in schools, and I think it's good. There might be some of my first. White parents put their children in private schools so that they would not be integrated. And the state, at the state legislative level, supported that by providing vouchers, book money, paid teachers, make that happen. So Lemon versus Kurtzman, while this is a religion case, right, it comes about because of race policy. And I want that to be really clear. But they say something important here. They say in order for a law that is passed, at whatever level, regulation, be passed, be constitutional, it must have a secular purpose. What does secular mean? Yeah.
Non-religious.
Non-religious. For example, Christmas. Does Christmas have a non-religious purpose?
Yes.
Yes, it does. Tell me what the non-religious purpose of Christmas is.
It depends on the celebrating, but there can be a religious element to something, and then there can be a secularized version of that.
Exactly. So there can be a religious purpose as long as there's also a secular purpose. So the city of Norman can, in fact, have a religious, not religious, a Christmas parade, right? They call it Christmas parade. No problem. Okay? Because there's a secular purpose. What's the secular purpose for a Christmas parade?
It's not fun.
Kids have fun. Community building. What else? There's a bigger one. What? Okay, entertainment. All right. Fundraising. Santa. Okay. Community gathering. I like that you guys are kind. All right. You can come up with the first best reason right away. To make money, right? And so the downtown businesses attract people to come down and buy things. Right? Commerce. That's the number one reason. Secular purpose for a Christmas parade. Now, the second thing is it can neither advance nor inhibit religion. Okay? If I have a Christmas parade, can I keep people out who are not Christians? No. Right? Can I tell the Christian churches that have floats in the parade that they cannot sing religious songs? No. Right? So you can have a float for the Church of Flying Spaghetti Monster, where everybody's wearing pasta strainers on their head and maybe engaged in smoking things. Right next to a float, yes?
So I have a question, since
Sure.
I'm head of a parade thing. Can you inhibit religion by not letting them pass out things? Does it have to be narrow, or
Yes.
can I say all floats cannot pass something out?
You can say all floats cannot pass something out, but I meant no candy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can say nobody can do this and you're doing it for a public safety reason. But if the purpose behind it is to inhibit a particular religion, and I know what that purpose is because I read your memo, then
What?
no, you cannot. Okay?
Don't write it down.
Don't write it down. Right? Can't advance nor inhibit religion. You can't say it's only for this religion. You can't keep other religions from participating. You can't say it's only for religious groups, right? The Cub Scouts. I was a member of Miss Jimmy's School of Dance in Pryor, Oklahoma, closest in the universe. And we danced every Christmas parade. Usually the jingle bells. Okay. No excessive government entanglement with religion. And so then we get to Eric's question a little more specifically. You can't say you can sing this or you can't sing this. You can't say I have to see the flyer that you're passing out before you pass it out. Okay? If I'm throwing candy that says God is love on it, I can do that. Okay? I cannot be regulated in that way if that's something I'm allowed to do. Now, there have been a couple of cases since that time that are really significant. One is in 1980. The Kentucky State Legislature required all public schools to put up the Ten Commandments. This is one of my favorite Supreme Court decisions, okay? Because I like it when the justices are mean. It's one of my favorite things, all right? So, in this decision, Kentucky argues that the Ten Commandments are secular in nature. Right? That the Ten Commandments are secular in nature. To which the Supreme Court says, so have you read them? Because the first one says what? Thou shalt have no other God before me. Right? That's not so secular. Right? It also goes on to say things like, they said, oh, well, it's just a set of laws that we believe in here in Kentucky. Oh, so you punish people for not honoring their mother and father? So you're going to go and, to people's houses and ask them if they covet their neighbors' wives? Right? Is that illegal? And the Supreme Court said no. This is clearly doing what? Advancing a particular religion. In 2005, right? And over here we have some other codexes. The Supreme Court said no. Those aren't the same, they're not equal. Oklahoma did it too, by the way, outside the legislature. We'll get to that in a second. But in Texas, how many of you ever been to the Texas State Capitol? Okay, what is it? What does it look like?
Great. They sort of have it's been a long time. Well, I don't know what you're.
Well, there's a Texas State Capitol, and then behind it, there's a large wooded area, like a park, right? And scattered throughout the park, there are monuments to lots of people. Sam Houston. There's a big thing